This single dad helps a kid pay for a $1 slice of cake at the grocery store. But when he finds out who that kid is, he's shocked. Comment, giving a rating from 0 to 10 for my story. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I count on your help. The aisles of the bustling supermarket in the chaotic metropolis echoed with the typical sounds of a busy, late afternoon. The single dad in his 30s walked slowly, pushing the shopping cart while his 4-year-old son pointed excitedly at the colorful products on the shelves. With his striking features and elegant bearing that drew attention wherever he went, he tried to maintain the normal routine of weekly shopping, even with the weight of the responsibility of raising the boy alone. It was when they reached the bakery section that the low sobs, almost whispers, cut through the ambient noise. He stopped, alerted by the sound of anguish, and his eyes met a scene that made him completely forget his shopping list. A tiny girl, who looked only 2 years old despite appearing to be 4, held in her trembling little hands some dirty, darkened coins. Her large, tear-filled eyes were desperately fixed on a small birthday cake behind the glass counter. The clerk behind the counter, a woman in her 60s with a tired and impatient expression, repeated for the 3rd time that the coins were not enough to buy the $1 slice. Her voice carried the harsh tone of someone who dealt with difficult situations daily, but there was something in the child's silent determination that began to soften her rigid posture. The single dad felt his chest tighten. Without thinking twice, he approached the counter and completed the missing amount, handing the bills to the clerk with a gentle smile. The girl looked up at him, and for a moment he saw in her eyes a gratitude so profound that it disconcerted him. It wasn't just thankfulness, it was as if that simple gesture had saved something much bigger than a slice of cake. When he asked softly what the reason was for so much determination for that specific treat, the girl lowered her eyes and whispered in an almost inaudible voice that it was a very special someone's birthday. Before he could ask more questions, she disappeared among the people, carrying the cake as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. His son, who had watched the whole scene with curiosity, asked why the girl was so sad. The single dad didn't know how to answer completely, but something in that brief encounter deeply moved him. During the rest of the shopping trip, he couldn't stop thinking about those big eyes, full of determination, and the fragility of that little child facing the world alone. In the following weeks, he began to notice the girl in different parts of the city, always alone, always with the same tattered clothes, a faded blue dress that must have belonged to someone bigger. She collected cans with methodical precision, organized pieces of cardboard carefully, and occasionally approached people to ask for help, but always with a dignity that impressed him. It was during one of these casual observations that he discovered where she lived. Under the main overpass of the city, in a small space improvised with cardboard and old blankets, the girl shared the space with an elderly woman in her 60s. The older woman could barely move, leaning on a makeshift cane made from a broom handle, but her eyes still shone with intelligence and affection every time she looked at the child. The single dad watched from afar several times, trying to understand the dynamics of that unlikely duo. The girl took care of the woman with touching dedication, sharing every piece of food she got, organizing the few belongings they had, and talking softly to her during the cold nights. The old lady, in turn, taught things to the girl. He could see her lips moving in careful explanations and the delicate gestures showing letters in the air. The loneliness that the single dad had carried since the divorce 2 years ago began to turn into something different. His ex-wife, an ambitious woman who had traded family stability for the promise of a more luxurious life with a wealthy businessman, had no idea of the feelings he harbored. She only saw the man she had left behind, without realizing how her absence had created a void that he was trying to fill by being both father and mother at the same time. Secretly, he began to leave bags with food and clean clothes near the place where the two slept. Always at dawn, always careful not to be seen, always with a heavy heart, thinking about that child who demonstrated impressive intelligence despite all the adversities. The girl could read perfectly. He had discovered by watching her decipher posters and signs on the street with ease that surprised any adult. The first storm of winter arrived with unexpected violence. For 3 consecutive days, the rain lashed the city non-stop, turning the streets into rivers and making any outdoor life impossible. The single dad couldn't sleep thinking about the girl and the old lady exposed to that fury of nature. In the early morning of the 4th day, when the storm finally showed signs of truce, the single dad couldn't resist anymore. He put his son in the car and drove to the overpass, finding the two completely soaked and shivering with cold. The old lady coughed violently, and the girl tried to protect her with her own fragile body, even though she was equally wet and cold. Without hesitating, he took them to his house. During the trip, the girl remained in absolute silence, holding firmly an old cookie tin that she protected as if it contained her most precious possessions. The old lady, between the coughing fits, murmured words of gratitude that she could barely pronounce completely. In his cozy house, after dry clothes and a hot shower, the two settled in the living room. It was then that the single dad's curiosity about that mysterious tin was finally satisfied. When he gently questioned her about what she kept there, the girl opened the container with reverent care, revealing dozens of coins organized by value, some crumpled bills, and even some foreign pennies that someone had thrown on the street. The revelation that followed cut his heart like a knife. That money, collected coin by coin during months of hard work, was entirely destined for the purchase of medicine for the old lady. The older woman suffered from severe arthritis and respiratory problems that worsened with the cold and humidity of the streets. The girl had memorized the names of all the medications and their prices, calculating meticulously how much she needed to save for each treatment. The old lady, realizing the man's emotion, began to tell her story in a weak but determined voice. She had been a teacher for 40 years, dedicating her life to the education of underprivileged children on the outskirts of the city. When she retired with a meager pension, she was evicted from her house for not being able to pay the rents that were constantly increasing. It was on the streets that she found the girl, abandoned as a baby at the door of an orphanage that no longer had vacancies. The orphanage, overcrowded and with limited resources, had allowed the old lady to take the child, but without any official support. Since then, the two had survived together, creating an unlikely family based on unconditional love and the mutual need for companionship. The retired teacher taught everything she knew to the girl, transforming the streets of the city into a classroom without a roof. It was then that the single dad understood why that dollar slice had been so important. It was the birthday of the only person in the world who loved the girl, and she had spent her precious medical savings to celebrate that special day. The old lady cried when she learned of the gesture, revealing that she didn't even remember when she had mentioned her date of birth to the child. During the following days, while the old lady recovered from the bad cold, the single dad established a routine that warmed his house for the first time in years. His son and the girl played together with an impressive naturalness, as if they had always been siblings. The boy taught games he had learned at school, while the girl shared her wisdom of the streets and her survival skills. The single dad's ex-wife, however, soon found out about these visits through curious neighbors who had noticed the different activity in the house. Her reaction was explosive and immediate. During a call full of threats and insults, she made it clear that she would not allow her son to associate with dangerous bums and that she would take legal action if necessary. The pressure escalated rapidly when she hired a private investigator to investigate her ex-husband's personal life. The man hired began asking questions in the neighborhood, at the boys' school, and even at the single dad's work, creating an atmosphere of distrust and speculation that left him increasingly distressed. The girl, with her intelligence sharpened by the difficulties of life, immediately noticed the growing tension in the house. During a conversation in the kitchen, while helping to prepare dinner with surprising skill for her age, she asked directly if she was causing him problems. The maturity of her words and the genuine concern in her eyes made the single dad realize that he was facing an extraordinary child. The old lady, observing the unfolding of the situation, revealed that she had worked for decades in the field of social assistance before becoming a teacher. Her knowledge of family law and parental rights surprised the single dad, who began to see her not only as a person in need of help, but as a valuable ally in his growing struggle. The situation became even more complicated when the ex-wife made an unexpected offer during a tense call. She offered a significant amount of money for the old lady and the girl to move to another city, away from the influence they could have on her ex-husband and son. The offer was tempting considering the desperate financial situation of the two, but the old lady's response was immediate and categorical. She refused the money with a dignity that impressed even the ambitious ex-wife. She explained that some values cannot be bought, and that the family they had found in that house was worth more than any fortune that could be offered. The girl, hearing the conversation, hugged the old lady tightly, whispering that she would never leave her alone, regardless of what happened. The single dad's son began to ask difficult questions about social inequality, questioning why some children lived on the street while he had a comfortable home. His innocent but profound questions made the father reflect on the kind of man he wanted to be and the values he wanted to pass on to his son. The principal of the boys' school, a progressive educator in her 30s, learned about the situation through the child and decided to act. She knew similar cases and was impressed with the reports of the exceptional intelligence of the homeless girl. Her decision to get involved would change the course of the whole situation in ways that no one could predict. The school principal scheduled a meeting at her house to personally meet the girl who had aroused so much interest in her student. During a Saturday afternoon, she arrived with a proposal that no one expected. After a 2-hour conversation, where the girl demonstrated knowledge of mathematics that surpassed children of 8 years old and an impressive reading ability, the educator offered a full scholarship at the institution. The offer should have been a cause for celebration, but triggered an even bigger crisis. The single dad's ex-wife found out about the scholarship through her network of influential contacts in the city and interpreted it as a deliberate manipulation to strengthen the position of her ex-husband. Her threats became more specific and dangerous, including the possibility of allegations of neglect and inappropriate exposure of the child to risky situations. The private investigator hired by her intensified his investigations, questioning the single dad's co-workers about changes in his behavior, photographing the house at different times, and even trying to bribe neighbors to obtain compromising information. The climate of persecution began to deeply affect the single dad, who began to question whether his good intentions were really harming everyone around him. During a particularly difficult night, when he couldn't sleep due to the growing anxiety, he found the girl in the kitchen, writing something in an old notebook that the old lady had found in the trash. The discovery that she wrote poetry of touching beauty was a moment of unexpected revelation. Her verses spoke about hope in the midst of despair, about finding family where you least expect it, and about the strength that comes from the kindness of strangers. The old lady explained that she had taught the girl to express her feelings through writing as a form of emotional therapy. On the streets, during the cold and lonely nights, the child created worlds of words that helped her to endure the brutal reality of her existence. Her poems revealed an old soul in a small body, a wisdom acquired through suffering that touched anyone who read them. The legal situation deteriorated rapidly when the ex-wife filed a formal petition in family court, alleging that the single dad was exposing his son to inappropriate influences and people of dubious character. The document, prepared by expensive lawyers, painted a distorted picture of reality, presenting humanitarian aid as parental neglect and the visits of the two women as trespassing. The single dad found himself forced to hire a lawyer with resources he could barely afford, withdrawing money from his savings intended for his son's education. The irony of the situation did not go unnoticed. While trying to help a child have access to education, he was financially compromising the academic future of his own son. The girl, realizing the growing anguish in the house that had become her refuge, made a decision that surprised everyone. She announced that she would return to the streets with the old lady, sacrificing her own chance of formal education to protect the family that had taken her in. Her words, spoken with a determination that contrasted with her fragile appearance, broke the hearts of everyone present. The old lady, however, revealed a secret that she had kept for weeks. She recognized the name of the single dad's ex-wife through the legal documents and the conversations she had heard. Decades ago, she had been a teacher to that same woman during her troubled childhood at a public school in a low-income neighborhood. Her memories of those times revealed a pattern of manipulative and ambitious behavior that had manifested early on. The former student had been a problematic child, expelled from several schools for compulsively lying and manipulating classmates and teachers to gain personal advantages. The old lady had tried to help her for years, offering extra support and special opportunities, but the girl had interpreted every kindness as a weakness to be exploited. Armed with this information and her experience in social work, the old lady began to advise the single dad on how to defend himself against the unfounded accusations. She knew the ins and outs of the legal system related to custody cases and knew exactly what evidence would be needed to prove the bad faith of the allegations presented. The first hearing in court was a disaster for the single dad's defense. His lawyer, inexperienced in family cases, failed to present the facts adequately and allowed the ex-wife and her experienced lawyer to dominate the narrative. The judge, impressed with the extensive documentation presented by the prosecution, established precautionary measures that severely restricted the visits of the girl and the old lady. The forced separation was devastating for everyone involved. The single dad's son cried for days, repeatedly asking when his new friends would come home. The girl, back on the cold streets under the overpass, lost the sparkle in her eyes that she had regained during the weeks of stability. The old lady, weakened by the lack of the medication she could no longer afford, began to show worrying symptoms of her chronic illness. The single dad, devastated by guilt and the feeling of helplessness, almost gave up fighting. It was then that the girl did something that no one expected. She wrote a letter to the judge, using her exceptional literary skills to explain, in simple but deeply touching words, how the single dad had saved her life and the old lady's life. The letter described not only the gestures of kindness, but the transformative impact that unlikely family had had on her existence. The school principal, who had followed the whole situation with growing indignation, decided to take more drastic measures. She organized a quiet campaign among the parents of students, collecting testimonials about the character of the single dad and evidence of the altruistic nature of his actions. Her network of contacts in the educational community began to mobilize in ways that the ex-wife had not foreseen. The neighbors, who had witnessed months of silent gestures of charity, began to spontaneously come forward in defense of the single dad. They had seen the bags of food being left discreetly, had observed the two frail figures being welcomed during the storm, and recognized the positive transformation that had occurred in the dynamics of the neighborhood since that makeshift family had formed. The girl's letter reached the judge through official channels, accompanied by a formal request from the school principal that the child be heard personally. The magistrate, intrigued by the exceptional eloquence of the document and the unusual circumstances of the case, decided to schedule a new hearing where everyone involved could present their versions of the story. The special hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in family court. The formal and intimidating atmosphere failed to diminish the determination of the girl, who entered the room with the dignity of someone much older. Wearing clean clothes that the school principal had provided, she carried with her only a tattered notebook where she had written her most important poems. The judge, an experienced man in his 60s who had presided over hundreds of custody cases, was immediately impressed with the child's demeanor. When she began to speak, her clear voice and her carefully chosen words echoed through the room with a moral authority that silenced even the most experienced lawyers. She described not only the facts, but the feelings behind every gesture of kindness she had received. The ex-wife, confident in her well-crafted legal strategy, was not prepared for the emotional impact of the girl's testimony. When the child spoke about how she had saved every coin to buy medicine for the old lady, and how the single dad had completed the money for the birthday slice without expecting anything in return, something in the room visibly changed. It was then that the old lady asked permission to present evidence that she had carefully kept for decades. From a yellowed folder, she removed school documents, behavior reports, and personal notes from when she had been a teacher to the single dad's ex-wife. The records revealed a consistent pattern of lies, manipulation, and antisocial behavior that extended from childhood. The documents showed that the former student had been transferred from 3 different schools due to false accusations against teachers, theft of belongings from classmates, and episodes of psychological bullying against more vulnerable children. The old lady had repeatedly tried to help the problematic girl, offering extra support and counseling sessions, but all efforts had been distorted and used against her. The ex-wife's lawyer tried to question the validity of such old documents, but the judge was clearly interested in the patterns of behavior that emerged from the evidence. The old lady, with her experience in social work, presented each document methodically and professionally, demonstrating how the behaviors of childhood had evolved into the manipulative tactics being used in court. The girl then asked permission to read one of her poems, one that she had written specifically about the experience of finding a true family after years of abandonment. Her words deeply touched everyone present, including court staff who rarely became emotional during legal proceedings. The poems spoke about how small gestures of kindness can plant seeds of hope in hearts that had lost faith in humanity. The single dad's son, who had been allowed to be present during part of the hearing, surprised everyone by asking to speak. With the innocence of his 4 years, he described how his life had become happier since the 2 special friends had come home. His simple but sincere words about sharing toys, learning new things, and feeling less alone contrasted sharply with the portrayal of danger and inadequacy painted by the ex-wife. The school principal presented detailed reports on the exceptional academic progress that the girl had demonstrated during her few weeks of formal education. Her results in math and reading surpassed not only children of her age, but also students several years older. The educator emphasized that wasting such potential would be a tragedy not only for the child, but for society as a whole. The neighbors who had mobilized in defense of the single dad voluntarily attended the court, forming an impressive line of people willing to testify about his character. They described months of observations about his dedication as a father, his discretion in helping those in need, and the positive transformation that his kindness had brought to the entire community. The ex-wife, realizing that her strategy was failing, made one last desperate attempt. She claimed that the ex-husband was being emotionally manipulated by two people experienced in exploiting the compassion of others. Her words, laden with cynicism and contempt for the less fortunate, revealed a coldness that shocked even her own lawyer. The judge, who had listened carefully to all the testimonies, asked for a recess to analyze all the evidence presented. During the tense wait, the girl approached the single dad and whispered that, regardless of the decision, she would never forget the family that he had given her, even if only for a short time. When the hearing was resumed, the magistrate issued a ruling that surprised with its scope and depth. He not only maintained the custody of the single dad, but severely criticized the tactics used by the ex-wife, characterizing them as abuse of the legal system for personal purposes. More importantly, he formally authorized that the girl and the old lady be officially integrated into the family. The final revelation came when the judge announced that he had independently investigated the ex-wife's history, discovering that she had used similar tactics in previous relationships. Her patterns of manipulation and emotional blackmail were documented in lawsuits she had filed against other former partners, establishing a history of predatory behavior. The ex-wife lost not only the legal battle, but also had her visitations reduced due to the evidence of manipulative behavior that could harm the emotional development of the child. The judge determined that future changes in custody would only be considered if she could demonstrate a genuine transformation of character through professional psychological counseling. In the months that followed, the makeshift family flourished in ways that no one had imagined. The girl, now with access to formal education and stable emotional support, developed her exceptional skills at an accelerated pace. Her poems began to be published in the school newspaper, inspiring other children and adults with her messages of hope and resilience. The old lady, with access to the necessary medical care and a stable home, recovered much of her lost vitality. She became a second grandmother to the single dad's son, teaching him valuable lessons about empathy, social justice, and the importance of helping those who need it most. Her experiences as a teacher and social worker enriched the education of both children in ways that no formal school could provide. The single dad discovered that by opening his heart and his home to those in need, he had found not only an extended family, but also a greater purpose for his life. His loneliness was replaced by a home full of laughter, mutual learning, and unconditional love. The experience transformed him from a man who was simply surviving the divorce into someone who thrives by building genuine human connections. The neighborhood community was also transformed by the example that this family represented. Other people began to get more actively involved in helping those in need, creating a support network that benefited dozens of families in vulnerable situations. The supermarket where it all began even established a food donation program for underprivileged children. Years later, when the girl graduated from high school as valedictorian, she dedicated her speech to the man who had completed the money for a dollar slice and changed the course of her life forever. Her words about how small gestures of kindness can create waves of transformation that spread far beyond what we can imagine echoed not only in the auditorium, but in all the hearts that had been touched by that extraordinary story of love, sacrifice, and human redemption. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.